The Grace of Uncertainty, another in the continuing podcast representing the emerging book, coming slowly to shape and to form with structure and ideas and support. It is the evolution of a thought that came about with Donald Trump. Yeah, sure, lots of stuff comes as a push against Trump. After all, it makes sense that those who claim to follow a path of truth and enlightenment, whether that is Christian or other form of spirituality, and you link arms behind the messages of Donald J. Trump, there is something wrong. And that's part of what began this quest, this writing, this journey. If you can say on a t-shirt, Jesus is my Savior, Trump is my president, there's something definitely wrong with your belief system. And that includes the political as well as the spiritual, your belief system. When your politics is not founded upon demonstrable evidence, but simply hearsay and fabrication. Remember, Trump was recorded as having lied over 30,000 times in the course of 4 years of presidential utterances. 30,000 times, basically nonstop, every time he opens his mouth. It is not true. Well, how do you get there? How do you push back against that? And that began my journey. My journey away from dogmatism. My journey away from what people claimed to be true without evidence. And that became sort of a mantra for my quest, my journey for what? Intellectual freedom? I'm always reminded by a good friend of mine that man gets in the way of God. And I sort of wonder whether it's not the other way around, that our beliefs about God prevent humans from rising to a greater level of compassion, of mercy, of care and long-suffering, of endurance, of helping. So there I go. That's the sort of the markers in the sand for me. That the t-shirts, the sloganeering, the God's going to work it all out, the end is near. Well, if you followed my blurbs on my written blogs, then you'll understand that I've sort of engaged this contemporary manifestation of it's the end of the world as we know it. I wrote a blog about REM, maybe having it right. It's the end of the world as we know it, and I feel fine. Why? Because, number one, perhaps it's not the end of the world. The end of the world as we thought in the 1950s and 60s was going to be a great blinding light of nuclear holocaust. Fortunately, saner minds and policies, diplomacy, all of those institutions that keep us from doing irrational things prevailed. At least they seem to so far. But then we've got the Hamas war in Gaza. We've got the Russian war in Ukraine. You notice the way I phrase those things. It is not against Palestinians in Gaza, it is against Hamas. But as the story of most guerrilla warfare goes, when you can't tell civilians from the fighters, the terrorists, everyone has a target. And that is the way it has unfolded in Gaza, unfortunately. Deliberate targeting of people, now that remains to be investigated and to be determined. But it, as in Vietnam, and my wife has a cousin who served with the American forces in Vietnam who has challenges with flashbacks and mental health. When you can't tell your friends from your foes in terms of appearance, civilian clothes, villages, cooking dinner, what the daily things of life, and yet underneath the gowns, underneath the robes, underneath the appearance are vests with explosive detonating devices, with weapon caches hidden under children's beds, in schools, in hospitals. It's hard to tell. And in that uncertainty, it's probably not a good idea to cast aspersions on anybody, but everybody is a loser when somebody takes up arms. Whether it's Hamas, with the greatest slaughter of Jews since the Holocaust, that's some title to hide behind. And I am not one who's going to judge the Israel Defense Forces for going over the top in response. How do you judge these things? Loss of life is loss of life. Violence is violence. Doesn't matter who did it. People are suffering and dying. And sometimes they are dying brutally, as in the Hamas terrorist attack. Sometimes they are just dying in the line of fire, as in bombs, missiles. Collateral damage, I guess, is the word. I don't want to sanitize it, because death is death, and thousands, tens of thousands, are numbers too staggering for the mind to behold. How did I get onto that? Well, things that don't make sense as part of what this journey from religious dogma is. If you believe that it's your spiritual destiny to rule the Middle East, then if you're a Muslim, you see Israel as the enemy. And if you're Jewish, you see all Arabs as potential enemies. Now, sometimes you can make a deal for temporary peace, but in essence, Islam is anti-Jewish. It is anti-Semitic. And it is anti-Christian. It is anti-everybody who does not either A, bow the knee to Muhammad and Islam, or B, pay your tribute to your Muslim overlords. And if you didn't do option 1 or 2, then option 3 is death, and that is the Quran in its open anti-Semitic, anti-Christian, intifada, jihadist, Islamist strokes. Now, how did we get onto this? Because what I really want to talk about is the inconsistencies in the Christian view of life. But I guess once you go after one faith and one tradition, you have to ask, is it true? Are the criticisms true of every other one? And that's where this podcast comes. Is it true for everybody? And let's start with the most obvious thing that I wondered about in my blogs, which is my personal observation over the course of my life at this point. Not the 70 but I'll do the 70 and hope there's another 10 in the bank somewhere. But in my life, I would have to say the ship of faith has foundered on the shoal of unanswered prayer. And I'm not sure if that's a working title for a section, but it's sort of looking at how we measure our faith. Can it be measured? And my conclusion is that praying to God, much like Spaceballs, the movie, and Bartholomew, that your prayers, your praying to God, your ritualistic invocation of the divine goodness, is like coming home to an alcoholic parent. You never know what you're going to get. Or, as an image that I used in the blog was, a rolling divine hand with dice to an upstretched human petition prayer opening palms up to receive a blessing. And the roll of the dice is what's falling into your hands, indicating my belief that it's inconsistent. And if it's inconsistent, it's like an alcoholic parent. You never know what you're going to get. Is it going to be a yes, your answer to prayer? Is it going to be a no? Either one is supposed to be good because you learn from either one. But what about the maybe or the wait? Those are the troublesome ones where you keep praying your whole life. And some people say, well, that's the diligence and the perseverance will be rewarded. And at the 70 marker, I'm willing to say, I'm not so sure about that. Don't hedge your bets on that one. It doesn't mean that some people will not continue a life of prayerful vigilance. And I think that's the whole generation between the end of World War II and the beginning of the nation-state of Israel, who sort of saw their faith as being possibly fulfilled in the apocalyptic visions of St. John's Revelation, or Daniel, the book of Daniel's big and prophetic, or the book of Numbers that talks about the sacrifice of the red heifer. If all these things, the rebuilding of the temple, the third temple, the beast, the Antichrist, going into the temple and saying, I'm God, worship me, well, if that's not Trump, I'm not sure what we're looking for. And if we're looking for the fulfillment of things that cannot be proven to be utterances and prophetic, then what is the purpose? Well, I've often mused that the purpose is to keep us stuck. Yeah. And clowns to the left of me, jokers to the right. Here I am, stuck in the middle. Stuck is one position that we have, but it's of choice. It's of choice to not ask the tough questions, not look for the cognitive dissonance created by belief. In what? Well, miracles. You pray to God for a cure for cancer, for your friend who's suffering to be not suffering, to have a cure for all the ills, to see world peace. Isn't that what we often wish for at Christmas? What do you wish for the next new year? And you write down your wish list and put it on your New Year's resolutions. I hope for a cure for cancer in 2024. I hope for a better job, better wages, less strife, less social turmoil, less conflict, less weapons, fewer weapons, fewer people willing to use weapons, the way of peace. And yet all these remain elusive. Is it part of human history that we are bound to not progress? We're bound? Well, what about the age of enlightenment? Are we enlightened, or do we live in an age where enlightenment is possible, but we choose not to avail ourselves of it? And as I alluded to early on, I have a friend who reminds me constantly that my humanity is getting in the way of grace. Really? How does that work? I think I'm too smart for the Bible? No, I don't. I just think the Bible has a purpose, and its intentions can be seen through something other than the lens of faith. Faith is sort of wrapped up in these old expressions, please be patient with me, God isn't finished with me yet. Or variations on that theme, where we try to say, yeah, I keep slipping up. Well, yeah, I pray to God for all these things, and they just keep happening, Still got these weaknesses, still can't do it. Well, everybody hides behind, but we're not perfect yet until Jesus comes again. Well, I'm not sure about until Jesus comes again. The Holy Spirit was given as a seal, a sign that you're marked off, you're set aside, you're on your way to glory. Or are you? Lots of questions along the way. And I have a few that are remaining unanswered, and it's the unanswered nature of these things that make me ponder dogma. And I'm just going to refer to the blog that I wrote called Does Prayer Work? Giving God Too Much Wiggle Room. The yes, no, maybe so of answers to prayer are well within the randomness of life. Do you need an inconsistent alcoholic godfather figure, so to speak? Or do you need consistency? If you're told that the fervent prayer of a righteous person avails much, is that a truism or is that a hit and miss? And if it's a hit and miss, why is it a hit and miss? Is it because you're not righteous? What does it mean to be righteous? Well, every Christian is supposed to have their sins forgiven. So righteousness is already done, accomplished, redemption accomplished and applied. Title of a book that I grew up reading. It's all been done, signed, sealed, delivered. And yet we still labor under what? Sin? Oh, sinful man, wretched man that I am. Yeah. is that a whole bunch of wiggly wormness that St. Paul has anchored us to? I'm going to say anchored because it's a weight. It's when you feel inadequate, that no matter what you do, there's no health, wellness in you. Nothing you can do. You can't do it. And yet it seems that there's nothing God can do either, because you can go your whole life with certain thorns in the flesh, as Paul would have put it, things that continue to plague you. They're not taken from you, and the excuse is, well, you need these thorns because they keep you humble. And I'm not sure about that either. There's lots of excuses for things not getting better in the church. A church divided is one of the apostasies of our time, I think. When everybody claims they have the truth, when everyone has their version of the truth, when everyone claims miracles and points to things, I'm wondering, can you really point to them? And I will just wrap up with this notion here. I wondered about a methodology that would prove once and for all that God is listening and answers prayer, or he's not there and doesn't answer prayer. And I came across this article in, I think it was reported in Harvard, which is, does prayer work? And that's, the question was asked of people going into surgery. So one of the most significant studies was this Harvard study regarding prayer for patients facing heart surgery. Quote, the researchers looked at whether prayer on behalf of a patient could assist in the recovery from bypass surgery. A third of the patients were prayed for after being told that this might or might not be done, so you don't know whether people did pray for you or not. And a third did not receive prayer at all, and a third of the study group received prayer after being told that someone would indeed be praying for you. The researchers concluded that prayer had no effect on the recovery from bypass surgery. All groups had the same chance of recovery or complication. Study, data, evidence that demands a verdict. Belief is a kind of funny thing. It is like the Tooth Fairy. It is like Easter Bunny. It is like Santa Claus. But we hold it on a different level because it was part of our culture, our Christian culture. I'm wondering whether we need to revisit that. And there you go. That's enough musing for me for one podcast. The book is going to explore this idea, and Harvard study is just one of the pieces. Does prayer work? What happens when the ship of faith encounters the rocks of unanswered prayer? I hope crashing and burning is not part of it, but it's likely to create a new paradigm shift, breaking away from the shackles of dogma that kept us stuck. Choose what you will to live each day to its fullest, for you, for others. Let kindness, gentleness, long-suffering, compassion, all the things that we celebrate that are taught in the New Testament, be the things that are describing us with or without faith. Does it matter? Ask the questions, live your life. Bye-bye for now.